But let's start with the Los Angeles fires. 24 lives lost, more than 10,000 homes destroyed, and over 100,000 people evacuated. Beautiful suburbs reduced to rubble and ash. The face of LA completely changed, perhaps permanently. And after a week, the catastrophe is still ongoing. 3 major fires still raging, fanned by the Santa Ana winds. And you can see here's where the active blazes are ongoing. And now the districts of Bel Air and Brentwood are facing fire warnings that they could be under threat. And this may very well be the worst natural disaster in American history. And these fires weren't a shock. The Santa Ana winds have fueled wildfires throughout Southern California's history. LA's environmental factors and the fire risk are well known. So those running the state should have been prepared, but they weren't. Their hopeless response, unforgivable. They should have done everything in their power to mitigate the fire risk and reduce the fuel. Instead, they prioritised ideology and virtue signalling. And now there's uproar, quite rightly, about why tiny fish and diversity quotas were more important than saving homes and saving lives. Well, in a nutshell, here's what's gone wrong. Fire hydrants had no water in them. A major reservoir was left empty and unable to be used. No new dams were built despite funding approval 10 years ago. The city's fire budget was cut by $17 million US, that is, last year, and firefighting equipment was sent offshore. And as for the leadership, well, LA Mayor Karen Bass knew there was a high fire risk, but shrugged her shoulders and went on a free trip to Ghana. And when she was pressed on this by a reporter, here was her incredible reaction or non-reaction.
Do you owe citizens an apology for being absent while their homes were burning? Do you regret cutting the fire department budget by millions of dollars, Madam Mayor? Have you nothing to say today?
Back up. Appreciate it.
Have you absolutely nothing to say to the citizens today?
And then the city's fire budget was cut by $17 million US last year. And that's according to the Los Angeles fire chief, Kristen Crowley, who said this impacted on wildfire preparation. But her own handling wasn't so great either. According to the Wall Street Journal, only 5% of her department's budget was spent on fire prevention, 5%. And Crowley has called diversity, inclusion and equity a top priority. And then there's Governor Gavin Newsom. He's been so distracted by his obsession with Trump that he dropped the ball on protecting his own people. In recent months, he's spoken about Trump-proofing California. But what about fireproofing California?
His call for retribution and revenge is pretty clear. We responded to his assault on California where he tried to unwind our progress. And so what we're doing now with the special session is not waiting to react to that. We're preparing for that in a more sober way.
To think Newsom wanted to be president. Surely he's finished after this. Voters are furious and have turned against him. And Newsom told one upset voter that he was literally on the phone to the president, but it turned out he actually wasn't literally on the phone to the president at all.
That was my daughter's school, Governor. Please tell me what you're going to do. I'm not going to hurt him, I promise.
I'm literally talking to the president right now to specifically answer the question of what we can do for you and your daughter.
Can I hear it? Can I hear your call? Because I don't believe it.
I'm sorry. There's literally, I've tried 5 times. That's why I'm walking around to make the call.
Why is the president not taking your call?
Because it's not going through.
Well, that's the problem with these officials. Their ideological political obsessions are more important to them than fulfilling basic obligations to keep people and their homes safe. One of the biggest issues in this whole saga has been the lack of water, the water restrictions. all because of the laws around protecting a tiny fish called smelt. Trump has spoken about this on his social media accounts and in press conferences.
It's very sad because I've been trying to get Gavin Newsom to allow water to come. You'd have tremendous water up there. They send it out to the Pacific because they're trying to protect a tiny little fish, which is in other areas, by the way, called the smelt. And for the sake of the smelt, they have no water. They had no water in the fire hydrants.
Well, what's Governor Newsom's response to all of this? Well, he's announced an independent inquiry, but he also claims there's misinformation and he's spoken about cheap political shots.
The reservoirs are completely full, the state reservoirs here in Southern California. That mis and disinformation, I don't think advantages or aids any of us. Responding to Donald Trump's insults, we would spend another month. I'm very familiar with them.
Yeah, but it wasn't misinformation. The reservoir wasn't full.
That one reservoir that serves the Palisades was not full.
And that's exactly what triggered my desire to get the investigation, to understand what was happening with that local reservoir. That was not a state system reservoir, which the president-elect was referring to as it relates to the Delta and somehow connecting the Delta smelt to this fire, which is inexcusable because it's inaccurate, also incomprehensible to anyone that understands water policy in the state.
Well, there's no question the 117 million gallon reservoir was offline, was out of commission. Fire hydrants simply have had no water in them. And this has been widely reported. And the Wall Street Journal also reported that the smelt fish water protections led to billions of gallons of water being flushed out to the Pacific Ocean each year, along with chronic water shortages. The Wall Street Journal reports, and I quote, that Mr. Newsom opposed Mr. Trump's first-term efforts to ease the fish protections. They write, you can lead California progressives to water, but you can't make them think. But when you can't deal with questions about why fire hydrants are empty, why a reservoir was empty, why there isn't enough water supply, well, of course, just blame misinformation. And the left media is upset that Facebook and X won't help them censor the shocking truth. Now that Mark Zuckerberg is on the same page as Elon Musk in ending the so-called fact-checking that's really censorship in disguise. California's mismanagement is not a surprise, and it's not isolated to the area of fire protection. It extends to drugs, crime, homelessness, petty theft. And there's a sensational New York Post editorial about this. It says, with a Democratic governor, Democratic mayors, Democratic city councils, and a Democratic justice system, the progressives have darkened the land of perpetual sunshine. This week's devastating wildfires are the pinnacle of Democratic incompetence. Environmentalists and politicians refuse to clear the underbrush that fueled the flames. A reservoir in Pacific Palisades was shockingly closed for repair. This is a reckoning. The voters must demand total change. Democrats have enjoyed one-party rule in California for too long. And there is no one else to blame for what has happened. California is not paradise lost. California is paradise squandered. The people must take it back. It's an excellent editorial. I recommend you read it. But LA, that we know as home to Hollywood's sunshine, wealth and opportunity, well, it's now the global face of woke mismanagement. It's the extreme example of putting ideology above common sense. But the biggest and saddest question now is, how does LA rebuild from this? The 10,000 families who've lost everything they own. Where do they go now? Where do they live? How do they recover? So many don't have insurance, and that's another story. But it's incomprehensible to think how much has been destroyed and how many homes have been lost. The extent of the destruction is the outcome of extreme incompetence of Californian Democrats, whose shocking decisions unquestionably exacerbated the fires. And they've been exposed, but you have to ask, at what price?